Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to the EduSat network. Our topic of discussion today is post-modern times, and friends, we are going to be taking it up in two parts. So friends, today is the first part, and more specifically this lecture will be talking about developments from 200 BC onwards in terms of the economy, polity and society. And friends, for this very lecture we have in our studio our subject expert Dr. Shankar Kumar, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Hindu College, University of Delhi. And I'd like to also tell you that sir has been associated with us for quite some time, giving us brilliant and wonderful lectures. So with this I give the command to sir, and I request him to begin the lecture. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, Urvashi, and good afternoon, viewers. As stated, we shall today be talking about the post-Mauryan times, and post-Mauryan times in chronological sense would mean the time, say, from around 180 before the birth of Christ, 180 years before the birth of Christ, before the beginning of the Common Era, as it is said now, and it will cover the period up to the beginning of the Gupta imperial phase, that is Gupta dynasty, which began say around 320 CE, 320 years of the Common Era. So the chronological span is of around 500 years or so, and this period is having an identity of its own in Indian history, and whatever historical writing that you come across around ancient India, you will find that there is a sense of individuality accorded to the post-Mauryan times in its own sense. Therefore, there are so many formative impulses that we can discern in this period. Quite a few of the traits that emerged around this time are extremely noteworthy from the point of view of the way history unfolded from here on up to the end of the ancient times, that is, say, around the middle of 8th century. Now, this post-Mauryan times, the fact that it is regarded as a separate kind of chronological block, one should understand that despite this individuality, a true assessment of the period cannot be made with complete disregard to what is happening in the period preceding this, that is around the Mauryan times. And the way we talked about Mauryan times, that cannot be understood properly unless we trace it back to the developments in the 6th century BC North India, because it is primarily the culmination of the same historical forces that we get to see flourishing in the Mauryan times. And similarly, the elements of economic, social and political changes triggered in the preceding period also had its ramification in this period, which is the subject of our study today. So what we mean here is that as soon as we see the disintegration of the Mauryan Empire around 180 BC or so, the epicenter, the political epicenter shifts from the Middle Gangetic Basin, and we have a multiplicity of dynasties, political dynasties springing up in different parts of the Indian subcontinent. And this is limited not only to North India proper, because when we spoke of the Mauryan times, we can recall that our discussion in the nuclear and core area sense of the Mauryan Empire was by and large limited to the area north of the Vindhyas, although the empire did extend beyond the Vindhyas down to the southern tip, leaving aside the Tamil, Chol, Cher and Pandya kingdoms. So these areas were outside the domain of Mauryan extent. But when we talk of the post-Mauryan times, it's noteworthy that the areas around Deccan area and also in the bordering states of the Mauryan Empire, that is the Chol, Cher, Pandya and Satyaputra areas, which is the southern tip of the Indian peninsula. There also we do find in the post-Mauryan times some very formative phase getting unfolded from historical point of view. And that is what accords significance to this period from the point of view of state formation, what some historians tend to call secondary state formation. This is going to be the prime task so far as today's discussion is concerned. We shall try to survey the political spectrum of the post-Mauryan times, and maybe in the extended part of the discussion that will follow subsequently, we shall try to locate the economic, social and other aspects of these changes. So, if we do the survey of the landscape in the post-Mauryan times in political sense, we find that the Shungas come to rule over the area which is by and large the Gangetic plain, followed by the Kanvas, and we all know that Pushyamitra Shung is credited to have brought about the downfall of the Mauryan rule, because he was probably a military leader under the Mauryas, and it was as a result of some kind of coup d'etat in the military coup that this iconic empire disintegrated to give way to smaller polities in the form of the Shungas and subsequently Kanvas in the Gangetic belt as such. And beyond that, of course, there are several other political dynasties coming up, and as a result of not only the loosening of the central authority that was exercised from Patliputra in the Mauryan times, but also as a result of you can say coming up of the historical forces in these areas which which in the preceding period did not probably have enough capacity to throw up its own you can say political dynasties or the ruling stratum, so to say. So, the areas that we will survey today will include the areas in Odisha, the areas in Maharashtra, Andhra, Deccan area, northwestern areas of the Indian subcontinent, and also the peninsular areas. And we do find that in the post-Mauryan times, these areas are undergoing some kind of a transformation whereby they are developing enough capacity, economic and social capacity to probably generate enough surplus, leading to some kind of social differentiation to the extent that some segment of the society comes to emerge as a ruling stratum, and that is how these polities are sought to be understood in this formative phase. And in this exercise, we find that from around 180 BC or so, we have the emergence of the Shungas, who were erstwhile the Mauryan officials, Mauryan military commanders, and we also have the Kanvas, who ruled up to 28 BC in by and large the Gangetic belt, one can say, and their control had shrunk. Let's not understand it with the dimension of the Mauryan times, because when we are talking of the Shungas and Kanvas, basically we are talking of Magad area and the adjoining area. So the dimension of the rule or the territory had shrunk to the nuclear and core areas only. And if we move beyond this, then in the present day Odisha area, what was referred to as Kaling in those times, we have the rise of Kharvels and it is under the Kharvelas that we have the king Kharvel, that we have the first evidence of a ruler coming from 1st century BC in Kaling area. Let's also remember that despite this wonderful account of Ashoka's conquest over Kaling, which has assumed iconic proportion in not only historical terms but also in terms of legends. What is noteworthy is that we don't have any credible evidence of the kind of political rule that was in place in Kaling before this conquest was embarked upon. So we don't quite know what was the ruling power and who were the rulers in Kaling area, although the conquest, Ashokan conquest, Mauryan conquest is mentioned in glowing terms, and the kind of sense of guilt that it induced in Ashok himself, to the extent that he got converted into a Buddhist, and thereafter pursued the policy of Dhamma and peaceful conquest hereafter. So the point that I am trying to make here is that despite all these glowing account of Kalinga war, we don't get the direct evidence of the ruler of Kaling. Meaning thereby, what I am hinting at is that in historical terms, it is as late as up to 1st century BC that we have the first direct evidence of a ruler by name in Kalinga area, and that is the Kharvel. We all know of the Hathi Gumfa inscriptions where we have edicts related to Kharvelas, which talks of successful campaign carried out by Kharvel in areas including Magad, also the northern Deccan, and as south as up to the Pandyan kingdoms. So one doesn't know whether it were actually carried out because there is nothing to corroborate this assertion from other sources, but distinctly there is something very important about this, that here is a king in Kaling who is claiming to have carried out conquests in areas as far as up in north, up to Magad, and down south up to the Pandyan area. So there is at least a claim of having ruled over a vast territory. We don't know what is the nature of that rule, or it was one-time conquest, or it was some kind of an administrative setup. We don't have enough evidence to corroborate this. Nevertheless, it is a very good pointer to the fact that this area had made a transition to historical phase, and Kaling had emerged into historical phase from here on, that is 1st century BC onwards, with the emergence of the Kharvelas. Then if we look at the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent in the post-Mauryan times, that is 180 BC onwards, then we encounter a multiplicity of not only dynasties, but dynasties owing allegiance to what technically would be outside India, if we go by the present boundary of India. And there we encounter the Indo-Greeks present in a formidable way around this time. Probably they were the erstwhile generals of Alexander, and who had been occupying the area around Bactria, and we have several coins bearing legends in Greek and also subsequently in Brahmi, which testifies to the fact that they originally were Indo-Greeks, but as a result of continued rule in this area, they also had learned the political skill of communicating in local languages and local scripts, that is Brahmi, and this is how in the post-Mauryan times we get to see in the northwestern part of Indian subcontinent. All of us know about Menander, the king Menander in Milind Panho, which is a text owing allegiance to Buddhist philosophy. We know of the dialogue between Menander and Nagasen, and Menander's coins were found in areas as far as up to, say, Kabul on one side and Mathura on the other. So this is the domain, territorial zone in which Menander is ruling, who is an Indo-Greek ruler. We also know of the Base Nagar pillar inscription, which is present-day Vidisha in Madhya Pradesh, and this pillar inscription probably was erected by Heliodorus, who was an envoy of a king by the name of Antilochidas, and he probably ruled from Takshila, and he was a follower of Vasudeva cult. And this is also cited repeatedly in Indian historiography as a kind of a rule which tried to come to terms with the local ethos and religiosity, and it was a kind of political pragmatism that a ruler who essentially is an Indo-Greek but is ruling over the Indian territory and is also trying to absorb and imbibe some of the religious elements of the area which is the ruled area. And this is something which is extremely interesting, and this is something which gave some kind of a clue to the subsequent rulers as well. And this is something which is not limited to only this time, even in the period preceding this, that in the Ashokan period itself, during the Mauryan age, we have already discussed that there was this practice of communicating with the people of different areas in their own language. For instance, Ashokan inscriptions in the northwestern part of Indian subcontinent are written in different script, and they are using the language which was spoken in that area, and it wasn't as if whatever is the metropolitan language of Pataliputra or Magad is sought to be imposed on these areas. So there is fair degree of political pragmatism at work, and we see a continuity of the same with respect to the Indo-Greek rulers also, who are extending control in the northwestern part of India in the post-Mauryan times. So that is one element that we get to see in the post-Mauryan times in the northwestern part of India. Also, apart from the Indo-Greeks, we have a formidable presence of the Shakas. And Shakas again are said to be the people who originated in Central Asia and went on to establish political control in not only northwestern but also in western India, and their rule continued as late as up to 5th century AD, because Shakas are spoken of even in the Gupta period as having some kind of political presence and influence in the western part of India. And we also know of the Shaka era, which started say around 78 AD or Common Era 78. From there on, different kind of calendar is also a part of Indian tradition, which is Shaka Samvat. And these Shakas are identified in the early phase also through the inscriptions which are found from Junagadh, attributed to a Shaka king called Rudradaman. And this is belonging to, say, around 2nd century AD. And this Shaka rule around this time probably was in some kind of a constant strife with another power which was emerging in the western part of India, that is in the Maharashtra area, that is the Satvahans. And we have several inscriptional evidence of Satavahan rulers and also the Shaka rulers who are claiming victories, military victories over each other. Also, these claims are substantiated through say numismatic evidence as well, because we also have instances where the coins originally probably floated by the Shaka rulers are overstruck by the Satavahan rulers, and we shall be talking about it. So this goes on to say that in the post-Mauryan times there is a formidable presence of the Shakas in this part of the Indian subcontinent, and that is constantly getting challenged by the formidable presence of Satvahans as well. And that is how things are unfolding. So far as the Shakas are concerned, we have already spoken of the Junagadh inscription, from where Rudradaman's period or Rudradaman's reign is getting illuminated. We have a reference to repair of a water reservoir during Rudradaman's period, where that edict does tell us, that inscription tells us that even earlier, in the Mauryan times also, this lake which was built probably in the Mauryan times was earlier also repaired by one of the governors of under the Mauryas. And subsequently we shall see even in the Gupta period the same inscription tells us with reference to the same Tadak, that is Sudarshan Lake. We have reference to a future Gupta ruler also having carried out repair. So there is some kind of a lineage of kings, not dynastically attached, but lending service in one capacity or the other to the same lake. Moving on from Indo-Greeks to the Shakas, we also have another formidable presence of the Kushanas. And Kushanas actually belong to the Yuchi tribe, which again is part of the same zone, that is Central Asian area around Kabul and the Central Asian republics today. We have reference to Kajula cardfices, Vima cardfices as the kings of Kushan dynasty, and subsequent to the two cardfices we have the iconic Kanishk, the rule of Kanishk, with which most of us are familiar. And Kanishka's rule, who was a Kushan ruler, his rule extends from 78 AD to say around 144 AD or so. And the extent of Kanishka's rule is somewhat not very clear, but we do have some evidence which does tell us that the area from Kabul extending across Kashmir and also a fairly good part of northwestern India, maybe including Mathura and areas east up to say Banaras or Allahabad, could have been part of Kanishka's empire, because we have quite a few coins belonging to the Kanishka's period unearthed from these areas. So it is the provenance of these findings which testify to the extent of the empire under the Kushanas, probably under Kanishka. And definitely the capital under the Kushanas is Purushpur, which is identified with present day Peshawar in Pakistan. And there is a good case to think of Mathura as the second capital under the Kushanas. And also the area, as I said earlier, the extent of the control under the Kushanas did include Varanasi, Sanchi, and there is also evidence of contact with China. So one can see that this entire landmass, with some portions belonging to China, some portions belonging to Central Asian republics, Kabul, Kashmir, Mathura, Varanasi, they are all under one political rule. And this is the time when quite a few Central Asian traits and the traits of the areas which were under political control of the Kushanas went on to become, went on to get Indianized to the extent that today they are very much Indian traits. They are identified as Indian traits. Quite a few practices, for instance, the practice of issuing portrait coins, the practice of issuing the gold coins. The gold coins, in fact, the Kushanas were the first issuers of gold coins in Indian history, because before that the coins in circulation, that is punch-marked coins, were usually made of silver, and we don't encounter gold coins before the coming of the Kushanas. And these portrait coins, which were a practice under the Kushanas, went on to become the practice of the royalty in India in the subsequent period, so much so that we have the Gupta rulers who came subsequently issuing maximum number of gold coins, and they are carrying legends, they are carrying portraits of the king or gods and goddesses and some other icons. But this is the practice which began around this time. So that is a very important thing to understand with respect to the rule of the Kushanas. Probably it is the advent of the Sassanids in Persia around 3rd century AD, which led to removal of the Kushanas from the political scene in northwestern part of Indian subcontinent. And if we move away from the northwestern part, where we have already seen Indo-Greeks, the Shakas and the Kushanas present in different capacities and lending different inputs so far as Indian history is concerned. Let's move on to the western part of the Indian subcontinent, the area around Maharashtra and so forth, that is northern Deccan also, in other words. So from around 1st century BC, which is the post-Mauryan times, we have the evidence of the Satvahans gaining prominence in this area. Now, before we get down to the business of understanding as to who the Satvahans were, let's also understand that Satvahans are referred to in the Puranas as Andhras. So when the historians read about the Andhras, the initial we can say inference was that they could be the people around the Andhra area. So there is one opinion amongst historians also, that probably they emerged from Andhra area and subsequently went on to dominate the Maharashtra area or the western part of the Indian subcontinent. But there is a counter view that Satvahans could have started from Maharashtra area, and it is only subsequently that they went on to occupy Andhra area as well, and Puranas record it from here on. And the rest is presented as history before how their presence in Andhra area. So there is some kind of a lack of clarity here as to where Satvahans' actual power began from. But fact of the matter is that there is indisputable evidence of the presence of the Satvahans in Maharashtra area from 1st century BC, and subsequently also in the Andhra area for a brief period. Now, earliest inscription that we get with reference to the Satvahans comes from Nasik area, which is a cave inscription, and it is the excavation of a cave during the reign of a king called Kanha, and probably Kanha was the first ruler of the Satvahans. And as I said, that Puranas are also referred to as Andhras in or Satvahans are referred to as Andhras in Puranas. But apart from this literary evidence, we don't have very many literature related to, or literary evidence related to the Satvahans, and therefore primarily their narrative is emerging from whatever is available to us in the form of inscriptions, and also a little bit of the information that we gather from their coins. And usually they were copper coins and silver coins. They probably didn't issue gold coins. So gold coins are not available with respect to the Satvahans. And core area, as we said, for the Satvahans is Western Deccan, and we have evidence of one inscription of a Shak Kshatrap called Nahapan in Nasik area. As we said, that there was constant strife between the two, the Shakas and the Satvahans. This is dated to around 1st century AD, which indicated that Shakas also initially controlled this area, but it was during 2nd century AD that this area was regained by the Satvahan ruler under Gautamiputra Shatakarni. So it is the mother of the ruler Shatakarni who is getting a particular inscription engraved, and which talks about this, that this area which earlier was under the control of Nahapan, who is a Shak Satrap, is recaptured by the Satvahan ruler, that is Gautamiputra Shatakarni. And he is Gautamiputra Shatakarni is referred to in this inscription as uprooter of the Shakas, and also the restorer of the Satvahan glory. This again tells us that this strife is not beginning around this time, rather there is a constant kind of struggle between the two for political upmanship in this area, that is western part of the Indian subcontinent. Also, as I said towards the beginning of this interaction, that there are instances, there is an instance of the coins of the Shakas, the silver coins of the Shakas being overstruck by the Satvahan rulers, and the Satvahan rulers are using their own symbols, that gets embossed over an earlier Nahapan, you can say, coin. So Shaka coins getting overstruck by the Satvahan legends or Satvahan icons, and this is symptomatic of some kind of a military victory by itself. So even in the absence of any literature, pointed literature talking about the military control, one can make out through such practices or through such numismatic practices that there was Satvahan conquest over the Shakas in this area around this time. Also, we have evidence of one Satvahan ruler establishing a matrimonial alliance with the daughter of Rudradaman, who happened to be a Shak ruler. Now, matrimonial alliance with the daughter of ruler is again symptomatic in military terms, and it does tell us that there was some kind of upmanship of the Satvahans with vis-a-vis the Shakas around this time, around Gautamiputra Shatakarni's reign. During Pulumavi, who is Gautamiputra Shatakarni's successor, the Satvahans are said to have extended their political sway and control in the Andhra region also. Again, the issue that we were talking about, because we have one Satavahan inscription coming from the Amravati area in the Krishna Godavari delta, and we also have some findings of Satavahan coins from this area. So definitely there was a formidable Satavahan presence for some time in Andhra area, but one doesn't know whether the actual seat of power was at Andhra and subsequently they moved to Maharashtra area, or it is after Maharashtra that they came to have some kind of a control over the Andhra area. Also significant is that the silver portrait coins of Pulumavi and his successors now started carrying legends in a Dravidian language also. Let us understand that Satavahans were using Sanskrit language, and Dravidian language appearing on the legends of the coin issued by the Satavahan rulers is important. And this Dravidian language was of course in addition to the Brahmi script that we get to see usually in the Satavahan inscriptions and coins. Yagya Shri Shatakarni was probably the last important Satavahan ruler, and by around 3rd century AD, the area over which Satavahans had political control in the preceding centuries, we now see that from around 3rd century AD, it is the Vakataks who have taken over, and alongside Vakataks, there are other claimants in the Deccan area in the post-Mauryan times. So this is the scenario that we get so far as the northern part of the Deccan is concerned, or the western part of the Deccan is concerned. If we move to the southern part of the peninsular India, that is South India proper, then as we said that we can begin by alluding to Ashokan inscriptional reference to the neighboring states of the Chol, Cher, Pandya and Satyaputras, who were under some kind of tribal chieftainships, and full-fledged monarchical state had probably not come into being in these areas, and the basic information from here on in the post-Mauryan times, apart from the reference that we get in Ashokan inscription, we have to rely on what we know as the Sangam literature. And Sangam literature is essentially a compilation of heroic and love poems, probably composed and written by bards, bards in the sense that people who moved around these villages, these settlements, and sang something either in the praise of the king or at times even cursing the king. And it was only subsequently, much after the times that we are talking about, it is around 4th, 5th century AD, around 300 AD, and subsequent, it is only subsequent to 300 AD that these poems were actually put together by a symposium of poets, by a seminar that probably was organized, whose nomenclature was Sangam, and that's how this name is carried over and is used for the entire corpus of the love poems and heroic poems that we get, and we use the same name for it, that is Sangam literature. So Sangam literature refers to the love and heroic poems composed from around, say, 1st century BC to around 3rd century AD, and by deconstructing whatever historical material it might have carried, historians try to have some kind of a rough idea, general idea about the society, economy and polity of the times. As I said that it is dated from around 1st century BC to 3rd century AD. Definitely these poems are not religious poems. So they are very much part of their culture, they are part of their custom. And there is repeated reference to the three, in fact, Chera, Chol and Pandya kingdoms and kings are repeatedly mentioned in these poems. And there is, if you really deconstruct the Sangam literature, you find that there are quite a few metaphorical usage of ecological categories that they call tinai to express something with reference to valor, with respect to something to express emotions related to love, hate, separation and so forth. So it is the ecological categories which become metaphors in expressing human sensibilities and human emotions. And therefore, historians do understand that these tinais or eco zones or ecological categories are extremely important to these people at around this time, and we have a range of it. So, and the most prized of, we usually get to hear of 5 tinais, 5 ecological zones in Sangam literature. We have Kurunjar, we have Palai, we have the most prized is of course the Marutam, which is the green patch where probably agriculture at a nascent stage is also practiced. But over a greater part of the area under the Chol, Chera and Pandyas in Sangam age, we don't find much of agriculture happening, and it is a different kind of habitat which are spoken of. Some are the coastal areas where the subsistence pattern is different, that is maybe they are resorting to fishery and conch, gathering conch shells and so forth. Then there are wooden areas, there are areas which are hilly, and all these areas have their own individuality in terms of not only vegetational growth, but also in terms of the subsistence pattern and behavior of the people inhabiting these areas, and they can be discerned from the Sangam literature itself. So, if we work out the political contours, then the Cheras are probably occupying the Periyar Valley, the Cholas are occupying the Kaveri Valley area, and the Pandyas are occupying the Vaigai and Tamraparni valleys. So, this is the broad kind of territorial division that we get to see. Also, another important thing with reference to these polities under the Sangam times or in the Sangam times is that from the beginning itself, from these initial phase itself, we find that these people or these polities had the practice of having twin capitals. So, one capital would be usual inland capital, and necessarily the other capital had to be a port town capital or a port center capital. Let us not call it town at this stage, but the mere fact that all these polities did care to have some anchorage over the coastal area and taking resources to have a capital like center in the coastal areas goes on to emphasize the formative role of the maritime trade that these polities were leveraging right from the beginning. We also are given to understand that this is also the time when the maritime contact with the Roman world is in a very flourishing state. We have archaeological evidence to the effect that the peninsular India was very much part of the loop, the commercial loop in which the Roman traders, Arabian traders were transacting business not only with India but right across to the eastern coast down to the Southeast Asia. And this peninsular India was very much a part of this commercial and trade nexus. What was the level of participation of these people in this transaction is a debated issue. Whether they, the people, whether they are the ones who are the prime movers and pushers of this transaction is debated, or whether they are simply some kind of middlemen associated in this transaction, or they had some kind of a subsidiary role in this. So that is something which is debated amongst historians, but the fact that they had an important role to play and a lot of maritime resource to the extent of even gold bullions, they were reaching this part of Indian subcontinent, and they are bullions because this area at this stage of historical development had not come to that level where they had developed market or so. Had they been having developed market, of course these gold items could have been used as coins to facilitate trade and penetrate deep into the Indian economy. But the mere fact that they are still used as bullions goes on to say that market as a structure was not very much developed around this time. Nevertheless, the polities in this area must have gained substantially in terms of surplus, and that could have triggered the process of social differentiation, leading to emergence of territorial states in a formidable sense in the subsequent times. So there is this particular aspect which needs to be noted about the polity in the Sangam age. Having surveyed the entire stretch of land and political dynasties right from North India, the Gangetic Belt, northwestern part of India, where we saw in the North India Gangetic Belt we have Shungas, Kanvas. In the northwest we have Indo-Greeks, we have Shakas, we have Kushanas. In the western part or the northern Deccan we have the Satavahans, followed by the Vakataks, and down south we have the three kingdoms mentioned, Chol, Chera, Pandyas, and revealed through Sangam literature. So that gives us the political phase of the Indian subcontinent in the post-Mauryan times. And let's now move on to the second stage of our discussion, where we shall be taking up each of these segments separately, not in dynastic terms, but in terms of society, economy, religion. So changes with respect to society, religion, economy, polity, and so forth. Polity we have by and large already covered. Now, in terms of society and economy, one thing is extremely clear, and that is that post-Mauryan times in Indian history comes across to us as a period of marked prosperity, marked material prosperity. And this is not only through references in literature, but primarily this assertion is made on the basis of the quantum and quality of the archaeological material unearthed from the post-Mauryan times. So, the number of urban centers that we encounter in the post-Mauryan times, and the total number of settlements that we get to see in the post-Mauryan times obviously had registered a remarkable increase over the earlier times. So this is a period, post-Mauryan period is a phase of urban and settlement expansion, which in itself is symptomatic of material prosperity. Even the quality of the material used for say building purpose or for other construction purpose are superior, and we have evidence of bricks, tiles, iron nails, concrete mixed with lime and so forth, instead of mud and wattle houses, which was the norm in the earlier times. So as you can see that there is a substantial increase in the quality of material used for construction purposes in the post-Mauryan times, and also one can make a sense of this prosperity, or one can think of this prosperity from another angle as well, and that is this period, quite unlike the earlier periods, gives us a lot of evidence of donations made by lay devotees. So donations to religious establishments by the ruling class is something which was a norm in India, and this was something which was going on in the earlier period also, modern period also. But in the post-Mauryan period, what is noteworthy is that alongside the ruling houses, ruling class, even the lay devotees, common people, are also offering something or the other to the religious establishments, particularly to the Buddhist and Jain establishments. And we have inscriptions to this effect. We have votive donations which have captured the details of these donations. And what does it tell us? It tells us that this prosperity, which is building up ever since 6th century BC period, is now penetrating to the middle segment, or to the people in general, and more people are becoming prosperous to the extent that now they have enough capacity to even donate. Common people also get down to the business of donating something to the religious establishments, and therefore this prosperity, which earlier probably was very restricted to the ruling class, had now begun to filter down to traders, artisans, and a large number of other occupational groups who are mentioned to have made donations to these religious institutions. Also, alongside this material prosperity, we have unprecedented expansion of trade and commercial network, increase in the volume of trade also, and wide range and complexity of transaction is attested from the records of this period. We have Jataka stories constantly referring to huge caravans of traders crisscrossing different arterial trade routes in North India and also Deccan, and various categories. Earlier it was a single category of nomenclature used for traders. Now we have multiplicity. So there is a variety of traders and merchants with distinct names and institutions adding to itself additional functions in facilitating trade and commerce. For instance, we have the word vanik. Now vanik would stand for a general trader. We also have alongside vanik sethis, and sethis are probably the financiers in this trade business. Also we have sarthvahas, and sarthvahas are probably the caravan leaders. So there is a variety of names that we get to see in the post-Mauryan times. Also other details, for instance, Jataka stories do inform us about ivory workers' street. Now, what does it tell us? It tells us that ivory workers or the guild of ivory workers had become so important that there are streets named after them, or maybe that they were located alongside, therefore that street was known. So, if the identity of a pathway, identity of a street, identity of a road is on account of the merchants and traders and manufacturers or artisans, then one can safely presume that this must have been a good time for them. So, in the realm of trade, commerce, manufacturing, artisanship, machinery, and so forth, masonry, we have some kind of prosperity hitting these segments in the post-Mauryan times. We have streets named after dyers, we have streets named after perfumers, we have florist shops, and we have carvers of merchants, as I mentioned earlier. So, all these details do tell us about the spread of prosperity and the fact that trade and commerce and transactions are doing extremely well in this area. With reference to the craftsmen also, we have master craftsmen and the apprentices under him, and the shrenis, the guilds, which conventionally played the role of say having some kind of a hereditary voluntary organization protecting the interest of a particular occupation group. Now, these guilds are in addition taking responsibility for even financing their members. So, there is the practice of giving loan to the needy people, and that is how things are getting transacted around this time. And this is something where we get to hear of the shrenis of bamboo workers, shrenis of weavers, shrenis of potters. So, these guilds are also multiplying, and they are doing a good business, so to say. There are references to rate of interest at which these guilds would lend money to its members and so forth. So, having surveyed the trade and transaction and commercial part of the economy, let us now come to agriculture, which is yet another important component of the post-Mauryan times, post-Mauryan economy as such. The agrarian frontiers, which probably was restricted to North India, that is the area north of the Vindhyas, are now expanding and breaching the Vindhyas down south. It is entering the northern Deccan as well, and we have evidence of carbonized grains that we find from Nevasa in Maharashtra, which testify to the fact that cultivation of wheat, barley, rice, sorghum, millet, they were all there around this time. So, this is expansion of the agrarian frontiers that we get to see in the post-Mauryan times in the northern Deccan area. We also have more and more complexities related to the ownership of land, and ownership of land here would mean there are different legal claims made in the earlier times with reference to land ownership, but now we get to see that it is getting individualized. And there are other complexities related to the economic aspect of the post-Mauryan times that we shall be taking up in the next segment of our lecture, which probably would be shortly organized.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. And friends, I hope you were able to gain a lot from this lecture, and with this we sign out, and we hope to see you soon again. Thank you.